Morning. Isaiah 12:2. See, God saves me. I will trust and not be afraid. For the Lord God is my strength and song, and he has become the one who saves me. Isaiah 25:9. In that day they will say, surely this is our God. We trusted in him, and he saved us. This is the Lord. We trusted in him. Let us rejoice and be glad in his salvation.
Good job. Good job. Regardless of what I say, it won't compare to that. At 7 years old, I wasn't sure that I even knew where church was, much less reading. So I appreciate Reese doing that. And as you do it, you have to find scriptures that don't have big words in them. But this morning, the last couple of weeks and through this quarter, we've been studying in Bible class from Luke. And as I started, looking at this book and looking at things we're talking about, there were some things that really struck me in the book. And some of them were just some of the basic words that Jesus uses. And they're simple words like true, forgive, pray, love, ask. Simple words. But somehow, as humans, we seem to complicate those words. And there's one of those words I want to talk about today. And John, you can breathe easy. It's not a giving sermon. I know you see the money. The first thing I know an old treasurer guy says, okay, there's got to be somebody who's looking for money. It's not, but it holds the clue as to the word that we're going to talk about today. And it's not Warren Jordan's cash paycheck. That's not either. He's not here to defend himself. That's not it. But there's something about that money that has the word in there that we want to talk about today. You get two opportunities today to participate. Here's the first one. Any ideas of what that simple one word is that we find on our currency? God's one. We're going to talk about him, but that's not the primary one. Trust is. My question is, the money says, in God we trust. Do we? I'm going to share with you today a little bit about trust and lessons from my family. So most of the time when I preach, it's something that Paul needs. And it's not any different today. When I was beginning my junior year in high school, wrong one, yeah, that's okay. When I was beginning my junior year in high school, our minister in Columbia, South Carolina, Richard Beasley, learned of a family in North Carolina with 5 children, 3 boys and 2 girls, who were in desperate need of help. The family was in a temporary facility, and if something wasn't done quickly, they were going to send the children to a state-maintained orphanage. Richard came back and had a meeting with 5 potential families in our congregation. He presented this plan to them as to what he wanted to do. It would take a commitment from all those 5 families if the plan was to work and keep the children close together. The plan was for each of the families to take one of the children and eventually adopt that child. Richard got commitments from all 5 families. My mother and father already had 4 children, but they wanted to adopt one of the boys. Already having 3, my mom said this is a natural fit. So in 1968, Terry Keith Ludlow was 3 years old when he came to live with us and become a member of our family. And I'm sure most of you have probably seen TV commercials of impoverished countries and nations and their children. Terry could have been a poster child for any one of those countries. I remember the first time I saw him, it was this and probably the last time I saw Terry, when he was thin, emaciated, and all I can remember is it just looked like a stick with this big head on it. And all because his body just wasn't filled out at 3 years old from lack of food. But at 3 years old, he had endured things that no child or adult should ever have to go through. According to Terry, he had been beaten, hit in the head with a shovel, and the walls of the house were riddled with holes from things being thrown at it and even gunshot. He was obviously malnourished and said he never knew if there was going to be food to eat on any given day. A clear case of mental and physical abuse. Can you imagine how he must have felt the first day that he walked into our house? He probably felt like he must have landed on the moon. He said, you know, here I am, here's a place, I've never been in a place this size, like this. I'm surrounded by strange people that I don't know. I'm in a different state. He was alone. None of his natural brothers or sisters were there. Everything that he owned that day was in a small cardboard box. And to quote Leon Russell, he was a stranger in a strange land. And one of my most vivid memories with Terry was the first day that we sat down at the table to eat dinner. Now, he had no idea about a prayer, because in his world, if you closed your eyes, you might get hit with something, or somebody may be there trying to take the food off of your plate. So my mom fixed his plate, and she took it and gave it to him and sat it down in front of him. And I can remember like it was yesterday, the first move that he made when that plate hit the table. He's guarding the plate. And he literally sat there with a spoon and just raked it into his mouth. We haven't even passed the food around the table and Terry was through eating. So he had to quickly learn, you know, that he would be able to take his time, he could sit there and eat, that nobody that was sitting around that table was going to take the food from him. But Terry would have to learn to trust to be able to do that. Now, Terry had no reason to trust anybody. In his life, the people around him, some were abusing, others were in the same shape as he was with the siblings. He didn't have any trust that someone would provide food for him. All he was fearful of is that somebody was probably going to take it away. He was next to the youngest. So you can imagine in the ranking order how much food you're going to get. All he cared about was getting the food and getting it down. It was a dog-eat-dog world where he was from. So it took a considerable amount of time before he relaxed and realized that nobody there was going to take his food. He had never thought about who's preparing the food, what that took. All he had in his mind was get it eaten, and get up. That was his life. But there was some good news for Terry, and that was tomorrow was another opportunity to get 3 meals. He had not experienced that, but it was new for him that it's going to be every day this happens. He can't believe that there's a breakfast, a lunch, and a dinner. And heaven forbid he ever even dreamed about seconds. But it took a while for him to realize that, you know, the people that were around him cared for him, loved him, They would play with him, read to him, and make sure that he was tucked in bed every night. And I think sometimes we're a lot like Terry and his plate with our relationship to God. A lot of the times, the first thing that happens is we get our defenses up. Instead of taking them down, we want to build them up. But that's not what God has in mind for us. He wants us to sit down and get to know him. He wants us to sit down at that table and fellowship with him, just like you do around your own family dinner table. And he wants you to spend quality time with him, so you get to know him better. And get that understanding that God is the source of all that we receive. And we've got to trust him. Unfortunately, because of our flawed nature, it's difficult to completely trust someone or something. God knows what we need. He knows what we need in our life now. He knows what we're going to need in the future. If you look at Matthew 6, verse 8, it says, "Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask it." So God takes care of us in ways we can't completely and fully understand. You know, Terry didn't know what his future was going to be when he was born. Not a lot of us do. But until he was 3, it was pretty easy to see that his future was going to probably be pretty bleak and unpromising. As of today, Terry's lost all of his natural brothers and sisters except his oldest brother, Roger. And Terry was probably going to be heading down the same path, the same direction that they were. But God had a plan for Terry. When Terry was born in 1965, he didn't know Paul and Barbara Daniel, and didn't know that our families and our paths would cross, and the important role that he would play in our family and in our development. But God knew what Terry needed, and he already had a plan in place for him. So Terry didn't fully know what he needed, and he didn't know what was going on behind the scenes. At 3 years old, when we got Terry, if he went to the doctor, it was probably in an emergency room, never been to a dentist, was behind on the educational piece, and eventually was looking at adoption. So he never knew about what was going on behind the scene. To him, it was, here's a place and now I feel a little safe and I can eat. An example of that is like a travel agent. LaDonna is upstairs, but she can vouch for this. If you want a great vacation, the only thing you have to do is pick up the phone and call. You can tell that travel agent and tell LaDonna, I want to go to Paris. Now it's all up to LaDonna. She's going to be the one that's going to call and arrange your flights. She's going to get the hotels. She's going to make sure if you need a rental car. She's going to do that. And then she'll probably even send you some information about some tours or what's in the area. All of that good stuff. Good travel agents like LaDonna probably even go so far as that they go ahead and call that hotel before you get there. Make sure you're registered. She calls you to let you know everything's set. Your biggest challenge is get to the airport. After that, you go have this great vacation. When it's all over, you said, man, was that smooth? Did that go great? Why did it go great? You trusted that agent. They did everything you asked. You just went and enjoyed it. You had no idea what took place behind the scenes. But let's look at some examples that we find in the Bible about some trust and non-trust. The first one's Abraham. Here's a person, and he and his wife had wanted a child, Nothing. At 100 years old, decide now's a good time to start a family. I can tell you, I'm not 100. I don't want to start a family. I don't want to do that today. But Abraham did. And Abraham finally got his son. And then when his son's a little bit older, God speaks to him and he says, hey, I want you to take Isaac and I want you to go sacrifice him. Now, if Paul would have been having this conversation, it would have been a huge argument. Because I would have been wanting to remind God about what he told me. He didn't say a thing. He got him together, he and the servants, took him to the mountain, still hasn't said a thing. When they get to the spot, Isaac asks him, where's the sacrifice? Abraham's answer, the Lord will provide. So Abraham trusted God. He had made a promise to him. He believed wholeheartedly in what he had promised and that he was going to take care of things, and he did. One of my favorites is Rahab the harlot. Probably not the greatest profession, but here's Jericho. Here's this group of people that have shown up, and the word's kind of gotten out about them and their God. She's not an Israelite, doesn't know them. But all of a sudden, here's these two spies, and she decides, I'll help hide you. So she just asked him, okay, I did this for you. You do something for me. He said, okay, we're going to do our marching deal. We're going to blow the horns. The wall's going to fall down. Your family needs to be with you, and then, we'll save you. And that happens. But do you think Rahab knew what God's real plan was? She's a direct descendant to Jesus. He had a plan for her. And then we'll take a look at a couple that didn't. The children of Israel. The children of Israel had been hundreds of years in Egypt. They were slaves. Moses comes, gets them out, and you know that they hadn't cleared the city limits before. Oh man, it is hot. The whining started almost immediately. They get out from town a little ways. They see this cloud. They see Pharaoh's coming. Man, we'd have been better off staying in Egypt. Their whining got them what? 40-year vacation in the desert. And only 2 of those that left Egypt made it to the promised land. They didn't have that trust in what God was going to do and provide for them. And the last one is Peter. Peter is probably one of my favorite guys, because if there's ever been a knee-jerk reaction guy, it's Peter. I'll walk your ear off. I'll do, here's this night, they're in the boat, it's a storm, they see this person walking to them on the water, and they say it's a ghost. Jesus had to tell them, no, it's just me. So Peter decides, I'm going out. Peter's doing pretty good for a while, but he takes his eyes off of Jesus, and all of a sudden he gets doubt, and Peter's sinking. And the Lord picks him up, helps him back in the boat. Peter didn't have trust in Jesus or the power that he had, and he failed in what he wanted to try to do with Jesus. But there's trust in the gifts. It's not just that God provides for us monetarily. There's a lot of things that he provides for us. Sometimes we're not maybe totally in tune with what it is, but when I look back at Terry, the first part of his life, Christmas was not a real happy occasion for him. It was just another day that he had to endure. Didn't get presents, didn't give presents. But I can remember this particular Christmas, he had wanted this bike. And whatever the greatest color was and the type of seat and gears and all that, it's what he wanted. So my parents have their tree in their family room, and there's a little small hallway that leads to the laundry room and another bedroom. So they had taken Terry's bike and had put it in the hallway. Now, when they put the bike down, you have to know my dad. I'm not far from that tree, but you got to put a piece of cardboard down on the floor because you might mess up the carpet. So we got the piece of cardboard, we got the bike in the hallway. All the presents are open, and you can kind of see the look on Terry's face. Another disappointment, no bike. So my parents said, well, maybe you better go check the hallway. There may be something over there. Man, he gets up, and it's the fastest I've seen him move. He goes over there, comes back around the corner and says, well, what's this? Terry missed the gift. He had to move the bike to get the piece of cardboard up. We do the same thing. Don't just laugh. We do the same thing. God's given us gifts. We kind of, I don't know that that's one that I want to use or to have. But, when we don't trust God and commune with Him, we can't understand all that He's given us. Many have gifts and we don't really realize and don't use them for God's glory. We're either full of self-doubt or just unwilling to accept that gift. I think a little bit when I was doing this, Mark talked about, I think about Delbert. We asked Delbert to be kind of in charge of the middle school and high school educational program. If you had seen the look on his face when we asked him that, he'd have rather given me a kidney, his firstborn, anything. Don't ask me to do that. But we found out Delbert kind of has a gift for that. He can do it. He's big enough that if you don't, he's going to hurt you. So, whatever you want. But when we look at something like Exodus 3, Moses is every one of us. Moses left Egypt. He fled because he was going to get in trouble for killing somebody. And he's up there tending sheep, and here's this bush that's burning. It's not getting consumed. I got to go check it out. Curiosity tells me that. I'm a guy. If it's a widget or a gadget or something on fire, we're going to go see it. Moses goes and does that. And now this bush is talking to him. I would love to have been a fly on the wall to see this guy talking to a bush. That would have been worth it. But as soon as God tells him, I want you to go take my people out of Egypt. Well, no, not me. You got the wrong guy. Well, where were you born? Well, where were you raised? Well, God is a great salesman. Moses had everything in the world that you could tell, I can't do that. God answered every single one of them. Told him about your staff, what it's going to be, changed his hand where it was bad. I'm not a good spokesman. Don't worry. I'm giving you Aaron. I think Moses finally just got worn out because everything he had an issue with, God had an answer for. We're no different. God's given us gifts. There are things that we can do, but we have a tendency to want to sit back and say, I don't know if that's one I really want to do. So I think we sound a lot like Moses. Well, Terry continued to struggle through his teen years. These were difficult times for my parents. Terry finished high school and entered the Army 24 hours after his graduation. And he really did great. He went and graduated from boot camp. My parents went to Fort Benning, Georgia for his graduation. And Terry was going to move into Special Forces training. And he had completed the first leg of their training. And unfortunately, one bad decision on the first leave that he had cost him his career in the Army. Again, Terry's now adrift, didn't know what he was going to do. And by this time, he's pretty estranged from my parents. Now, at that time, Jackie and I and the girls were living in Winchester, Virginia. And if you don't know where that is, it's the top of the Shenandoah Valley off of Interstate 81. And it was one very cold January afternoon, the doorbell rang. And on the doorstep stood this coatless, soaking wet, dirty, unkempt person. When he looked at Jackie and spoke, she knew it was Terry, but she hardly recognized him. He had hitched rides from Jacksonville, Florida, heading to Syracuse, New York, to visit some friends. He got close to Winchester the night before, so we slept under an interstate bridge and then walked to our house the rest of the way the next morning. He had no coat, no money, no personal items, just the clothes on his back. Ironically, he had less when he showed up in Virginia than he did when he showed up at our house 21 years earlier. Well, Jackie brought him inside, directed him to the shower with the first pit stop at the laundry room, and she provided him clean clothes, fed him, and gave him a haircut. And I think that was the order. The haircut was debatable at whether that was coming first or second, but I think that was the third thing. He stayed with us for a couple of days and proved to be a great help. The one thing about having 3 kids is that when you get one of these communicable diseases, everybody seems to get it at the same time. Megan was in the throes of her chicken pox when Terry got there. So the girls called him, and he was about the size like a big teddy bear. So they called him Teddy Bear. And so before he went away, we bought him a winter coat and some clothes to wear. And I had a good friend that I was working with that lived in Scranton, Pennsylvania. And he was driving home one Friday afternoon, and I asked if he could give Terry a ride to the bus station in Scranton, because I had bought Terry a bus ticket and for him to be able to finish that leg going on up to Syracuse. He said that he would. So we all gave Terry some hugs, some money, and he was on his way to complete his journey. Terry had finally trusted, that Jackie and I would be willing to help him. And that was a big step for him. And I really think that this is bad. It was probably the wake-up call for Jackie and I. That one of the things that we felt very passionate about was helping people less fortunate. So when you look at Matthew, the 25th chapter, I told you, and this was well timed, I told you that you have 2 opportunities to participate. The second one is now. So I'd like you to read out loud Matthew 25, verses 35 through 40. I'll start you, but then I'm shutting up. For I was hungry,
and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry, and feed you, or thirsty, and give something to drink? When did we see you a stranger, and invite you in, or need clothes, and clothe you? When did we see you sick, or in prison, and go to visit you? The king will reply, truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, and you did it for me.
Great job. So Terry's trip to Syracuse proved to be one of the best decisions he ever made in his life. While he was there, he met a young lady named Pam, and they got married and had 2 children. And today, Terry is a proud grandfather. But through all the tough times and bad days with Terry, my parents never gave up on him, and they never regretted adopting that homeless 3-year-old boy. My parents were the only one of the 5 families who kept their adopted child. They trusted God and the plan that He had for our family. Then several years ago, the phone rang one evening at my parents' house, and it was Terry. It was a conversation my parents thought they would never have. Terry apologized for all of the hurt and the trouble he gave my parents. He told them that they were the only ones who showed him love and compassion, and that he was wrong for trying to hurt the ones that loved him. It took a long time, and becoming a parent himself, Terry had finally developed trust in his adopted parents, brothers, and sisters. So to reread what Reese read a little bit earlier, Isaiah 25:9, in that day they will say, surely this is our God. We trusted in Him and He saved us. This is the Lord. We trusted in Him. Let us rejoice and be glad in His salvation. What Jackie and I did for Terry and his family over the years was out of love. And there was never any thought of repayment or anything like that. 5 years ago, when Aaron got married and we sent out the invitations, one of the first people we heard back from was Terry and Pam. And they said, we're not going to miss a family event. They couldn't wait to be there. It was finally Terry's time to give. So over the last 5 years, our family's had some issues and difficult times, but Terry's always been there. It took almost a lifetime, but Terry has developed a trust with us, and we are now a complete family. So we look at summing this up, some questions for you. Where are you in your relationship with God? Do you take time in meditation and prayer? Are you sharing the good news about God and His Son? Have you dedicated yourself to the Lord? Do you know Him? Do you recognize Him as being the great provider? Do you spend more time worrying than doing? And do you have the patience to allow God's plan to unfold? And have you recognized your gifts? When you look at it, God sent His Son for our salvation. He's provided us with His Spirit while we're here on earth to dwell within us. And He's given us all individual gifts. And we need to recognize those and utilize them. And last question, are you willing to trust Him?